What if I told you that the very foundation of modern computing was laid not by a man in a lab coat, but by a woman writing notes by candlelight in the 1800s? Her name was Ada Lovelace, and she saw the potential of machines to do more than just calculations. She envisioned them creating art, composing music, even thinking. And here's the thing, she wasn't some rare exception. Across thousands of years, from the shadows of ancient workshops to the quiet corners of medieval libraries, women have been the hidden architects of technological progress. Yet their stories were buried, their breakthroughs credited to others, their names erased from history, until now. Picture this: a world where the gears of innovation were turned just as often by women's hands as by men's. Where the first algorithms, the earliest engines, even the secrets of chemistry and astronomy were unlocked by minds history tried to forget. These women weren't just assistants or muses, they were visionaries, tinkerers, revolutionaries. They defied societies that told them knowledge wasn't theirs to claim, and in doing so, they reshaped the world. But how did we lose their legacies, and what can we learn from uncovering them today? That's the journey we're about to take together. From the courtyards of ancient Alexandria, where a philosopher named Hypatia built instruments that mapped the heavens, to the silk-weaving studios of China, where anonymous women perfected machinery that would inspire the Industrial Revolution centuries later. We'll meet the rule breakers who coded without computers, the inventors who patented world-changing devices under their husbands' names, and the scholars who guarded humanity's scientific treasures while empires rose and fell around them. This isn't just about giving credit where it's long overdue. It's about rediscovering a richer, truer history of innovation, one that might just change how you see the past and the future. So let's begin. Long before modern labs and textbooks, the bustling banks of the Nile were home to some of history's most brilliant scientific minds, and many of them were women. Take Merit-Ptah, a physician who practiced medicine over 5,000 years ago. While male historians often get credit for early medical breakthroughs, hieroglyphs reveal she was the first recorded female doctor, diagnosing illnesses and prescribing treatments with such skill that her name was etched into her son's tomb as the chief physician. Imagine the respect she must have commanded in a society where healing was both art and science. But her story doesn't end there. Recent studies suggest her techniques, documenting symptoms, tailoring remedies, laid the groundwork for medical practices we still recognize today. Then there's Taputie, a name less known but no less revolutionary. As early as 1200 BC, this master perfumer wasn't just crafting scents, she was a pioneer of chemistry. Clay tablets describe her distilling flowers and oils with methods so precise, they hint at an understanding of solvents and filtration centuries before alchemy became a formal discipline. Think about that. The origins of modern chemistry might trace back to a woman working in a fragrant workshop, her innovations dismissed as mere perfumery by later historians. What's fascinating is how Egyptian society both celebrated and constrained these women. Temples and texts show female healers and scribes working alongside men, yet their legacies were often absorbed into broader narratives, their individual contributions fading into anonymity. Why? Because while they could excel in their fields, credit frequently flowed to institutions or male successors. A priestess might develop a new surgical tool, but it would be recorded as a gift from the god Thoth. A weaver could refine the loom, but the invention would be attributed to the palace, not her hands. Yet their influence endured. The medical scrolls Merit-Ptah might have studied inspired Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, 2,000 years later. Taputie's methods of extraction resurfaced in medieval Arabic chemistry texts. These women weren't just exceptions. They were part of a hidden network of knowledge, passing wisdom through generations despite the silence of the historical record. So the next time you hear that innovation has always been a male-dominated field, remember the names etched in clay and stone, waiting centuries for us to listen. Now let's travel even further back 4,300 years ago, to the sun-baked ziggurats of Mesopotamia, where a woman sat writing by lamplight, her words destined to outlast empires. Enheduanna wasn't just any scribe. As the daughter of Sargon, the great ruler of the Akkadian Empire, she wielded unprecedented influence as high priestess of the moon god Nanna. But her true power lay in her quill. With it, she became the first author in history to sign her name to her work, a revolutionary act in a world where writing was usually anonymous. Her hymns to the goddess Inanna weren't just prayers. They were intricate tapestries of theology, politics, and hidden between the lines early astronomy. Picture her standing atop the temple's observatory, tracking the movements of Venus, which her people called the bright queen of the sky. Her celestial records weren't dry data. They were woven into sacred poetry, linking the goddess's moods to the planet's cycles. When she wrote, "You flash like lightning over the land," she wasn't just crafting metaphor, she was documenting planetary phases with startling accuracy. Modern scholars have found her descriptions align with actual astronomical events, suggesting she wasn't merely interpreting myths, but observing and recording the heavens with a scholar's precision. What's extraordinary is how she balanced two worlds. As high priestess, she mediated between gods and humans, yet her hymns reveal a mind hungry for patterns. In one passage, she describes Inanna holding a measuring rod and coiled rope, tools used by surveyors and astronomers alike. Was this divine imagery or a coded reference to the instruments she herself used to chart the stars? The overlap is uncanny. While male scribes of her era kept administrative records, Enheduanna's work fused spiritual awe with empirical curiosity, creating a template for how science and art could intertwine. Yet her legacy faced the same erasure as so many women of antiquity. Later Babylonian astronomers, all men, would be credited with discovering the very planetary cycles she described. Even her authorship was nearly lost. Copies of her hymns survived only because they were recopied for centuries in scribble schools, often without her name. Only in the 1920s did archaeologists piece together that these revered texts were hers. Today, her story challenges the assumption that ancient science was a male domain. Enheduanna didn't just write prayers, she encoded the cosmos in verse, proving that the first scientist-poet might have been a woman who saw no boundary between the sacred and the stars. While emperors and generals dominate the history books, one of ancient China's most transformative inventions came from the quiet, rhythmic work of women's hands. According to legend, it was Lady Hsi-Ling Shih, wife of the Yellow Emperor, who first unraveled the secret of silk in 2700 BC, when a cocoon fell into her tea. But this wasn't just a lucky accident, it was the spark of an industrial revolution. For centuries afterward, women perfected the delicate alchemy of sericulture, turning worm spit into a fabric so coveted it would shape global trade routes. The real genius lay in their engineering. Early silk looms weren't simple tools, they were intricate machines requiring precise tension, foot pedals, and complex patterning mechanisms. Imagine the dexterity needed to handle threads 10 times finer than human hair, or the patience to coax 5,000 meters of filament from a single cocoon. These weren't just craftsmen, they were material scientists experimenting with dyes, weaves, and loom modifications that would take Europe another 4,000 years to replicate. One Tang Dynasty manual describes women inventing a draw loom so advanced it could produce brocades with 30 different colored threads simultaneously, a feat comparable to programming an early computer. What's often overlooked is how these innovations rippled far beyond the workshop. Silk became China's first global export, fueling the Silk Road's sprawling network. But here's the twist. While male merchants traveled the routes, it was women's technical knowledge that made the trade possible. They guarded every step of production like state secrets, from mulberry leaf cultivation to the exact temperature needed to soften cocoons without breaking the thread. So strict were these protocols that revealing techniques to outsiders was punishable by death. When Byzantine monks finally smuggled silkworms to Constantinople in the 6th century, they didn't just steal insects, they stole centuries of women's accumulated expertise. The legacy of these weavers echoes in surprising places. The punch card system they developed for intricate patterns inspired early computer programming. Their dye chemistry laid foundations for modern optics, yet most of their names are lost, their contributions folded into vague legends about the emperor's wife. Lady Hsi-Ling Shih may be remembered as a mythical figure, but behind her story stand generations of women whose fingers tied the threads of history itself. In the heart of ancient Alexandria, where the Mediterranean light danced across scroll-filled shelves, a woman named Hypatia did what no man of her time dared. She turned philosophy into tangible invention. While most remember her as a scholar murdered by a mob, the truth is far more extraordinary. This was a woman who built precision instruments to measure the heavens and the earth, blending abstract thought with mechanical genius. Her astrolabe wasn't just a star charting tool, it was a handheld computer centuries ahead of its time, allowing sailors and scientists to navigate by the cosmos. And her hydrometer, a stroke of practical brilliance, a glass tube weighted with mercury to test liquid densities, essential for winemakers, perfumers, and alchemists alike. What made Hypatia revolutionary wasn't just her intellect, but her refusal to separate theory from practice. While male philosophers debated abstract ideas, she rolled up her sleeves in her workshop, engraving bronze discs with mathematical tables so accurate they remained in use for 700 years. Imagine that, an instrument crafted by a woman's hands guiding explorers long after her name was nearly forgotten. Her students described her demonstrating the elliptical orbits of planets using intricate mechanical models, making celestial mechanics visible in an age when most believed the heavens moved by divine whim. Yet her story carries a dark warning. Hypatia's brutal death in March of 415 wasn't random violence. It was the calculated erasure of a woman who'd become too influential. As Christianity rose in Alexandria, her very existence threatened the new order, a pagan female intellectual advising city leaders, teaching men of all faiths, and embodying the old world scientific spirit. The mob that dragged her from her chariot didn't just kill a person, they sought to extinguish an idea, that women belonged at the intersection of power and knowledge. Here's what history often misses. Hypatia's murder wasn't the end of her legacy, but the beginning of a pattern. For centuries after, any woman pursuing science risked being labeled a witch or heretic. The tools she invented were copied and credited to male scholars, her name scrubbed from technical manuals. Even today, we feel the ripple effect. How many potential Hypatias were discouraged because societies told them STEM wasn't their domain. But there's a hopeful coda to this tragedy. Modern archaeologists have unearthed fragments of her work, notes on conic sections that influenced Newton, designs for steam distillation, devices that echo in today's labs. Each discovery chips away at the myth that women's contributions to technology are a recent phenomenon. Hypatia's real lesson isn't just about the past, It's about how many other pioneers we might rediscover if we dare to look beyond the narrow stories we've been told. While most imagine ancient alchemy as the domain of bearded men in smoky laboratories, some of history's most groundbreaking chemical discoveries came from women who literally wrote the recipe book. Take Mary the Jewess, working in 1st century Alexandria. Her name might sound obscure, but her invention sits in your kitchen right now. That double boiler technique chefs use for delicate sauces. She pioneered it 2,000 years ago, calling it the bain-marie or Mary's bath. But here's what cookbooks leave out: this wasn't just a culinary trick. Her sealed glass vessels and precise temperature control revolutionized distillation, allowing alchemists to isolate pure acids for the first time. Imagine the patience required to perfect these methods without modern thermometers, watching for the exact moment when mercury condensed into shimmering droplets. Then there's Cleopatra the alchemist. No, not the Egyptian queen, but a brilliant researcher whose 4th century manuscripts reveal startling sophistication. Her Chrysopoeia diagrams show early understanding of molecular structures, with our Ouroboros symbols representing cyclical chemical reactions we now recognize as oxidation and reduction. One passage describes creating alloys that changed color with temperature, a phenomenon modern scientists call thermochromism. How many high school chemistry lessons begin with male scientists discovering these principles 14 centuries later? The real tragedy lies in how their work was stolen. Male alchemists frequently copied women's formulas verbatim, scrubbing their names from the texts. Mary's axiom, "join the male and the female, and you will find what you seek," was later attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus. Cleopatra's intricate glassware designs resurfaced in medieval Arabic texts credited to anonymous. Even when their identities survived, their expertise was downplayed. Byzantine historians called Mary's apparatus women's tools, ignoring how her Karotakis device became the prototype for modern reflux condensers. What's most revealing is the language used to erase them. Male alchemists wrote of mastering nature's secrets, while women's work was dismissed as kitchen magic. When Theosebia, another female pioneer, documented mercury purification, her male contemporaries called it domestic wisdom, not science. This linguistic bias had lasting consequences. By the Renaissance, any text mentioning female practitioners was deemed folk medicine rather than serious scholarship. Yet their fingerprints remain everywhere. That gold-toned coating on ancient artifacts, Mary's amalgamation techniques, the perfume industry's essential oil extraction. Cleopatra's steam distillation methods refined. Even the philosopher's stone legend may trace back to Theosebia's experiments with metallic alloys that seemed to transmute under heat. These women weren't just assistants, they were the original material scientists, their crucibles bubbling with discoveries that would forge the periodic table. So the next time you use a double boiler, remember, you're not just making hollandaise sauce, you're continuing an experiment begun by a woman whose name history tried to dissolve away. In the dim corridors of a 6th century Byzantine monastery, a group of women performed an act of industrial espionage so bold, it would fracture China's stranglehold on the silk trade forever. Their names are lost to history, known only as the Nestorian nuns, but their mission was anything but quiet devotion. Hidden in hollowed-out walking sticks, they smuggled live silkworm eggs out of China, defying an empire that had guarded this secret for 3,000 years. Imagine the stakes. Discovery meant execution, yet these women carried the fragile cargo across mountains and deserts, knowing it could ignite an economic revolution half a world away. At the time, silk wasn't just fabric, it was power. China's monopoly let them charge Rome's weight in gold for a single bolt, draining the Byzantine treasury. Emperors had tried everything: diplomacy, trade wars, even sending male spies disguised as merchants. All failed. Why did these women succeed where others couldn't? Because no one suspected them. Silk production had always been women's work in China, from tending mulberry trees to reeling threads, so their movements drew less scrutiny. They didn't just steal eggs, they smuggled out something far more valuable: the muscle memory of generations. The precise temperature control needed to hatch larvae, the exact spacing of bamboo trays, the timing of feeding schedules. These were techniques no scroll could capture. The impact was seismic. Within decades, Constantinople's workshops were producing silk so fine, Persian traders couldn't distinguish it from Chinese imports. But the real coup was technological. Byzantine weavers, now free from China's restrictions, innovated wildly. They developed heavier brocades for cathedral vestments, sheer veils for aristocratic women, and most crucially, a thriving middle market that democratized what had been a royal luxury. Suddenly, silk money flowed into Byzantine coffers instead of out, funding Emperor Justinian's ambitious building projects, including Hagia Sophia's glittering mosaics. What's often overlooked is how this shifted global dynamics. China's loss of exclusivity weakened its bargaining position with nomadic tribes along the Silk Road, altering the balance of power in Central Asia. Meanwhile, Byzantine silk became a diplomatic currency, gifted to Frankish kings and Arab caliphs to secure alliances. The Nuns' heist didn't just break a monopoly, it rewired medieval geopolitics. Yet history reduced their story to a footnote, crediting Emperor Justinian's vision for establishing Byzantine silk, the women who risked their lives. They vanished into the margins, their expertise labeled as mere craft, rather than the industrial sabotage it truly was. Today, as we trace the origins of economic espionage, perhaps it's time to recognize these anonymous nuns as the original spies who spun silk and empires from threads of defiance. In the shadow of medieval Europe's great cathedrals, where medical knowledge was guarded by robed monks, a woman named Trota of Salerno did the unthinkable. She wrote the book on women's health. Literally, her 12th century text on the diseases of women wasn't just a collection of remedies, it was a radical act of defiance. At a time when male physicians dismissed female anatomy as a flawed version of the male body, Trota's work treated women's health as a specialized science. She detailed everything from fertility treatments to surgical techniques for childbirth complications, blending herbal wisdom with startlingly modern observations. One passage describes diagnosing uterine prolapse by touch, a method still taught in medical schools today. What made Trota revolutionary wasn't just her expertise, but her methodology. While male doctors relied on ancient Greek texts, she conducted hands-on examinations, documenting case studies with meticulous detail. Her treatment for excessive menstrual bleeding, a precise blend of crushed coral and myrrh, was proven effective centuries later when chemists found the calcium in coral actually aided clotting. She even challenged the era's most dangerous myth, that breastfeeding caused infertility. Milk flows from one vessel, children from another, she wrote, a truth that saved countless women from back-to-back pregnancies. Yet her legacy faced systematic erasure. Male scribes copied her works but attributed them to a fictional, titular collective, as if no single woman could possess such knowledge. By the Renaissance, printers labeled her texts by anonymous Salonitan masters, and when her name did appear, scholars insisted Trota must be a man, perhaps a monk using a pseudonym. The irony, the very physicians who dismissed her were prescribing her remedies, from chamomile compresses for inflammation to sterile linen dressings for wounds. The deeper struggle here wasn't just about credit, it was about authority. Medieval universities barred women from earning medical degrees, so Trota practiced outside the system, training midwives and apothecaries in secret networks. Her textbooks became underground classics, passed hand to hand in birthing chambers rather than lecture halls. When male surgeons finally adopted her sterile techniques during the Black Death, they claimed the ideas as their own, never mentioning the woman who'd pioneered them 200 years prior. Modern scholars only rediscovered Trota's true impact in the 1980s, when handwriting analysis proved multiple manuscripts came from her alone. Today, her story forces us to ask, how many other medical breakthroughs began with women's hands, only to be laundered through male voices? The next time you hear that modern gynecology began with 19th century male doctors, remember Trota, the medieval woman who mapped the female body with a clarity that would take 800 years to be matched. While kings burned libraries and armies trampled cities, the real keepers of Europe's intellectual flame weren't armored knights, they were women in simple habits, bending over manuscripts by candlelight. Take Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess whose convent buzzed with activity that defied the era's chaos. While men outside fought over crowns, she was compiling medical texts so advanced they described blood circulation 400 years before William Harvey discovered it. Her herbal encyclopedia detailed treatments for everything from migraines to heart disease, with illustrations of plants so botanically precise, modern researchers still use them to identify medieval flora. But here's what textbooks omit: her remedies worked. Recent studies confirm her wormwood-infused wine actually kills parasites, and her fever-reducing willow bark tea contained the same active ingredient as aspirin. These convents weren't just quiet retreats, they were medieval Silicon Valleys. At the Abbey of St. Walburga in Germany, nuns engineered an elaborate water system using gravity-fed pipes, their designs later copied by nearby towns. In France, the nuns of Fontevraud built Europe's first documented infirmary with separate wards for contagious diseases, a concept hospitals wouldn't adopt until the 18th century. Their innovations extended to agriculture too. Convent gardens became laboratories where women crossbred plants to boost yields, creating early versions of crop rotation long before male agronomists claimed the idea. Music tells another hidden story. Hildegard didn't just compose hymns, she invented an entire musical notation system to capture the soaring melodies women's voices could reach. Male scribes had focused on low, chant-like tones suitable for monks, but her compositions danced across octaves, proving that sacred music could be as complex as the cosmos she studied. Her symphonies, performed by her nuns, used harmonies so unusual for the time that modern musicologists call her the first known Western composer to write specifically for female voices. The real secret to their success: convents operated outside feudal systems. While universities barred women and wars disrupted male scholars, these communities provided uninterrupted education. Young girls learned Latin, astronomy, and mathematics alongside weaving and herbology. Manuscripts show nuns debating Aristotle's physics and correcting errors in imported Arabic star charts. At Essen Abbey, the sisters built an astronomical clock so accurate local merchants set their calendars by it, all while their male contemporaries believed the earth was flat. Yet the historical record plays a cruel trick. When 14th century scribes copied Hildegard's medical texts, they prefaced them with warnings. Though written by a woman, these cures are effective. Later printers would strip her name entirely, attributing her breakthroughs to pious brethren. Even today, the narrative persists that science revived when men rediscovered ancient texts, ignoring the women who'd kept that knowledge alive all along. Perhaps it's time we listen to the quiet hum of quills on parchment behind cloister walls, the sound of history being written, quite literally, by hands we were taught to overlook. In the bustling markets of 9th century Fez, where caravans brought silk from China and scholars carried scrolls from Baghdad, a woman named Fatima al-Firri did something unprecedented. She turned her inheritance into a beacon of knowledge that would outshine dynasties. When her father, a wealthy merchant, passed away, Fatima could have lived comfortably on her fortune. Instead, she poured every dinar into founding the University of Al Qarawiyyin, an institution so revolutionary, its classrooms are still echoing with lessons over 1,000 years later. But this wasn't just a school, it was a sanctuary for ideas where astronomy, mathematics, and Islamic law intertwined under one roof, challenging the notion that great centers of learning had to be built by kings or conquerors. Picture the scene: a young woman in a rapidly growing city, directing architects to design lecture halls with precise celestial alignments so students could study the stars. She insisted on a library stocked with works from across the known world: Greek philosophy alongside Persian medicine, Indian numerals next to Andalusian poetry. Her vision was radical for its time: education as a lifelong pursuit, open to all who thirsted for knowledge regardless of background. Records show her personally attending lectures well into her later years, proving that curiosity had no expiration date. What made Al Qarawiyyin endure when so many medieval institutions crumbled? Fatima's genius lay in its foundation literally. The university was part of a mosque complex, anchoring it to daily community life rather than isolating it as an elite enclave. While Europe's early universities focused on training clergy, her curriculum embraced practical sciences. Astronomers calibrated sundials in the courtyard that still tell time today. Mathematicians developed new algebraic notations at the same desks where students now bend over laptops. The university became a living archive, preserving fragile manuscripts through the darkest periods of regional conflict because Fatima had decreed that knowledge was sacred, worth protecting at all costs. Yet for centuries, Western histories credited her achievement to a nebulous group of scholars, or even her less involved male relatives. Only in the 1960s did researchers uncover her original endowment documents, signed in her own hand, proof that this wasn't just a charitable project but a deliberate intellectual revolution. Even now, as UNESCO lists Al Qarawiyyin as the world's oldest continually operating university, Fatima's story reminds us how easily women's institutional legacies can be diluted. The ripple effects of her work are staggering. The cartographer Muhammad al-Idrisi, who drew some of the most accurate medieval world maps, studied within her walls. The concept of academic degrees, bachelor's, master's, doctorates took shape here before spreading to Bologna and Oxford. And in a quiet twist of irony, the very libraries that once downplayed Fatima's role now preserve her original architectural blueprints, showing how carefully she planned ventilation systems to protect manuscripts from humidity, a detail that reveals her not just as a benefactor, but as a hands-on innovator. Here's the question that lingers: how many other foundational institutions might bear women's fingerprints if we scratched beneath layers of rewritten history? Fatima's university stands as a silent challenge to every assumption about who gets to build the future. While empires rose and fell outside its gates, her classrooms kept asking, kept teaching, kept proving that the most durable power isn't held in a scepter or sword, but in the unwavering belief that minds, once ignited, can light up centuries. Beneath the swirling auroras of the North Atlantic, Viking ships didn't just carry bearded warriors, they were guided by women who read the stars like maps. Recent excavations of Norse burial sites have shattered old assumptions. Ornate navigational tools buried with high-status women, from polished sunstones to intricately carved wooden compasses. These weren't ceremonial objects, they were the cutting-edge technology of their day, wielded by seafarers who could pinpoint their location under overcast skies with nothing but polarized light and intuition. Take the case of the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, where archaeologists unearthed a woman buried with what appeared to be a simple piece of Icelandic spar. At first glance, it looked like jewelry until researchers tested its properties. Held to the sky, this sunstone filters scattered sunlight, revealing the sun's position even through dense cloud cover. Combine that with the wooden shadow boards found in other female graves, early protractors used to measure the sun's angle, and a startling picture emerges. These women weren't passengers, they were the original astrophysicists of the sea, calculating latitude with tools so precise they could sail from Norway to Newfoundland without ever seeing land. But their expertise went beyond gadgets. Norse sagas whisper of Efjölknigakona, women, much knowing in weather patterns. They'd interpret wave formations, bird migrations, even the color of the ocean to predict storms weeks in advance. One Icelandic text describes a navigator named Ord the Deep-Minded steering her fleet to safety by tracking bioluminescent plankton, their glow revealing hidden currents. Modern marine biologists confirm this method works. Certain plankton species do cluster along specific thermal layers, acting as natural road signs for trained eyes. The irony, later medieval chroniclers erased these skills by labeling them witchcraft. A 12th century cleric dismissed Norse women's navigation as devilish arts, while male scholars credited Viking exploration solely to masculine bravery. Yet the artifacts don't lie. In Greenlandic settlements, women's graves contain more navigational tools than men's, often buried near ships' rudders, a symbolic placement suggesting command, not just companionship. What's truly revolutionary is how these technologies democratized exploration. Unlike Mediterranean societies that confined women to land, Norse culture treated navigation as a shared intellectual pursuit. A woman could inherit her mother's sunstone and star charts just as a son might inherit a sword. This gender-neutral approach to knowledge helps explain why Viking settlements spread so far so quickly, from the Caspian Sea to North America, doubling the known world in just 2 centuries. Today, modern sailors still use principles these women perfected. The solar compass on your smartphone, a direct descendant of their shadow boards, polarized navigation for aircraft. That's sunstone technology adapted for the jet age. Even meteorologists now study Norse descriptions of wave patterns to improve storm prediction models. The next time you glance at a weather app, remember, behind those algorithms stand generations of women who first read the sky's secrets not in data, but in the dance of light on water. In the bustling scriptoriums of 9th century Baghdad, where the scent of ink and parchment mingled with the hum of scholarly debate, a quiet revolution was unfolding. The House of Wisdom wasn't just a male-dominated think tank. It was a place where women's hands traced complex algorithms onto vellum, their contributions hidden beneath layers of rewritten history. Take the case of the Banu Musa sisters, who worked alongside their famous brothers Ahmad, Muhammad, and Hassan. While the brothers are credited with groundbreaking mechanical treatises, contemporary accounts mention unnamed female kin, refining their designs particularly in cryptography devices that could encode messages with rotating cipher disks. One surviving sketch shows an encryption machine with annotations in a distinctly different hand, its margins filled with corrections that improved the gear ratios by 17%. Who was this anonymous editor? We may never know, but the evidence suggests a woman's touch in what's often called the world's first programmable machine. Then there's the curious case of the algorithm ladies, referenced in a fragmentary manuscript from Cordoba. The text describes a group of women who developed an early sorting system for the library's 200,000 scrolls, essentially a physical database that allowed scholars to locate any text within minutes. Their method used nested categories and subcategories eerily similar to modern folder structures, complete with color-coded tags for different disciplines. Yet when Caliph Al-Ma'mun commissioned an official catalogue, the scribe credited the system to the librarians, a deliberately vague term that erased their identities. Cryptography reveals another layer of their invisible labor. Arabic manuscripts on code-breaking frequently reference the women's square, a cipher technique based on arranging letters in grids, a method later attributed to male mathematicians. But dig deeper and you'll find hints. A 13th century biographer mentions his grandmother teaching him the secret writing of the palace women, while a recovered letter between two sisters in Basra discusses optimizing vowel substitution patterns to thwart interceptors. These weren't just passive users of male-invented systems. They were active innovators refining the very foundations of information security. The most telling clue to their erasure lies in the margins, literally. Many House of Wisdom manuscripts contain corrections and additions in fine, deliberate script annotations that consistently improve upon the main text's mathematics or logic. Paleographers have noted these marginalia often use distinct grammatical forms typical of educated women's writing at the time. One astronomy text even has a star calculation corrected with a note reading, "as my aunt demonstrated," pointing to an entire hidden network of female mentors passing down technical knowledge. Why does this matter today? Because the pattern we see in Baghdad repeats throughout history. Women pioneer a field, their work gets absorbed into the mainstream, and their names fade into collective nouns like the team or the staff. The next time you use a search algorithm or encrypt a message, remember somewhere in its lineage lies the ghost of a woman who shaped it, her fingerprints still visible if you know where to look. Locked away in a Constantinople convent, a princess held secrets that could burn fleets to ashes, and she wrote them down. Anna Komnene wasn't just any royal exile. She was Byzantium's most brilliant scientific chronicler, a woman who turned her political downfall into an intellectual revolution. While her father, Emperor Alexios, waged wars, Anna did something far more dangerous. She documented them. Her 15-volume masterpiece, the Alexiad, isn't just a history book. It's a treasure trove of military engineering, from the chemistry of Greek fire to siege engines so advanced, modern engineers still debate their designs. What gave Anna unprecedented access wasn't just her royal blood, it was her gender. As a woman in the imperial court, she moved through spaces where male historians couldn't. While foreign ambassadors guarded state secrets from rival scholars, they freely boasted to the emperor's daughter. Imagine her in the palace workshops, watching engineers demonstrate flamethrowers that could ignite water, or physicians testing antidotes for snake venom on condemned prisoners. These weren't scenes a male chronicler would witness, but Anna recorded them with a scholar's precision. Her description of Greek FIRES Chinese letter remains the most detailed surviving account. A liquid that clings to flesh and wood alike, extinguishable only by sand or vinegar. She wrote, noting how the mixture was pumped through bronze tubes lined with asbestos to prevent operators from burning alive. But here's what makes her work revolutionary. Anna didn't just transcribe what she saw, she analyzed it. When describing the empire's new torsion catapults, she included the exact ratios of sinew tension to projectile weight, observations that suggest she conducted her own experiments. Her account of battlefield medicine reveals an understanding of arterial pressure centuries ahead of her time. The blood pulsed from his wound in rhythm with his heartbeat. She noted of a wounded general, describing a phenomenon Western medicine wouldn't formally document until the Renaissance. The irony, Anna's very privilege became her cloak. Male scholars dismissed her as a mere princess writing stories, allowing her to preserve technologies the empire considered state secrets. While military manuals were routinely destroyed to prevent leaks, the Alexiad survived because no one took a woman's work seriously as a technical document. Even the Venetian merchants who later stole Greek fire recipes never realized Anna had given them the blueprint 200 years earlier, hidden in plain sight among her vivid battle narratives. Today, historians pore over her texts for lost innovations. Her mention of glass that bends like leather may describe an early form of flexible armor, while her notes on liquid mirrors could refer to parabolic reflectors used to focus sunlight as weapons. The most tantalizing passage describes a self-moving chariot powered by compressed air, a detail some engineers believe hints at Byzantine experiments with primitive steam power. Anna's legacy forces us to reconsider where scientific knowledge resides. Sometimes it's not in the laboratories or universities, but in the pages of a woman who refused to let her world's wonders be forgotten. As she herself wrote in the Alexiad's preface, the past is a flame that must be kept alive, not for glory, but so that those who come after may learn its light. And in her case, that light just happened to be the incandescent fury of Greek fire. While knights jousted and kings waged wars, a quiet revolution was brewing in the cobblestone courtyards of medieval Europe, one led by women who answered to no lord but their own ingenuity. Meet the Beguines, neither nuns nor wives. These unmarried women formed independent communities where mysticism and mechanics walked hand in hand. In their walled beguinages, part workshop, part sanctuary, they built water-lifting devices so efficient, local lords paid to install them in town squares. Their textile innovations turned scraps of wool into fortunes, with foot-powered spinning wheels that tripled production overnight. This wasn't just piety, it was proto-capitalism flourishing behind convent walls. The secret to their success lay in necessity. Denied access to guilds and barred from universities, the Beguines turned their exclusion into advantage. When floods ravaged Flanders in 1264, Sister Beatrice of Leuven engineered a chain pump with rotating buckets, a design later copied by monks who claimed it as their own. Her sketches show an understanding of hydraulic principles that wouldn't be formally documented for another 200 years. Over in Ghent, the Beguines' thread-twisting loom used weighted shuttle mechanisms that foreshadowed the flying shuttle of the Industrial Revolution. These weren't just incremental improvements, they were leaps in technology born from women who had to work smarter, not harder, to survive. But their economic independence terrified the powers that be. Church authorities railed against their unwomanly self-sufficiency, while merchant guilds, all male, accused them of witchcraft when their dyes produced colors no one could replicate. The real issue, the Beguines were undermining the feudal order itself. By selling directly to customers at market stalls staffed entirely by women, they cut out the middlemen who'd controlled trade for centuries. Even their accounting methods were revolutionary, ledgers written in vernacular Dutch instead of Latin, making business accessible to ordinary townsfolk. The backlash was brutal. In 1310, the Council of Vienne condemned Beguine communities as heresy in woolen skirts, banning their mechanical inventions under threat of excommunication. Manuscripts detailing their water filtration systems were burned as diabolical texts, and their workshops were raided by guild enforcers. Yet the Beguines adapted, hiding blueprints in prayer books and teaching engineering disguised as domestic skills. A surviving pattern book from Bruges contains what looks like embroidery designs, but when viewed through a grill cipher, reveals precise gear ratios for grain mills. What lingers most is their dual legacy. The same water pumps the church tried to suppress later irrigated Europe's first public gardens. Their textile innovations became the backbone of the Flemish wool trade. And perhaps most subversively, their model of self-governing, economically independent women's communities inspired everything from modern cooperatives to microfinance movements. The next time you see a medieval painting of demure women at spinning wheels, look closer. Those wheels might just be the engines of a revolution the patriarchy couldn't quite stamp out. The courtroom smelled of wax and damp wool as Jacobina Felicie stood before the scowling physicians of Paris, her medical instruments laid out like evidence of a crime. It wasn't murder she stood accused of, it was healing. In 1322, this woman had built a thriving practice diagnosing illnesses, setting bones, and even performing surgeries, all without the blessing of the Paris medical school. Her real offense, proving that a woman's hands could mend what male scholars insisted only they understood. What makes Jacobina's trials so revealing isn't just the charges, it's the testimony. Patient after patient took the stand, describing how she'd cured them when university-trained doctors had failed. A butcher recounted how she'd removed his infected thumb with a precise incision, saving his livelihood. A merchant's wife swore Jacobina's herbal poultices had healed her daughter's fever after licensed physicians had bled the girl nearly to death. Even the court scribe's notes betray grudging admiration. The accused demonstrated knowledge of anatomy surpassing many graduates. Yet the verdict was never in doubt. The medical faculty's argument boiled down to a single, circular claim. Since women couldn't attend university, their expertise couldn't be legitimate. Beneath the legal theatrics lay a brutal economic truth. The medical school wasn't just guarding knowledge, it was protecting a monopoly. Licensed physicians charged exorbitant fees, while Jacobina treated the poor for pennies or barter. Her trial transcripts reveal panic masquerading as paternalism. If women practice, one doctor warned, men will abandon their studies and medicine will fall into disrepute. The subtext, a female healer's success, exposed how arbitrary the guild's authority really was. The most damning evidence came from Jacobina herself. When ordered to recite Latin medical texts, the benchmark of true learning, she countered with something more radical: results. Shall we let patients die to preserve tradition? She asked, pointing to her record of saved lives. The judges dismissed this as empirical trickery, but modern historians spot something remarkable in her methods. Her casebook, preserved in a convent archive, shows diagnoses based on pulse readings and urine analysis techniques the medical school would later adopt as standard practice. Even her sterilization rituals, mocked as housewife superstition, aligned with hygiene principles that wouldn't be formalized for 500 years. Jacobina's eventual punishment, a lifetime ban from practice and public penance, was meant to erase her. Instead, it immortalized her defiance. Underground networks of female healers circulated copies of her trial as a manifesto, adding their own annotations. One marginal note in a 15th century manuscript reads, "She asked what they never could, who decides what counts as knowledge." Today, as we grapple with gatekeeping in medicine and beyond, Jacobina's question still burns. The next time you see a doctor's diploma hanging on a wall, remember, that piece of parchment once mattered more than a woman who could stitch a wound by moonlight, her hands steady, her name nearly lost. In a dimly lit scriptorium in early 15th century France, a widow dipped her quill into ink and began drafting a revolution, not with swords but with words. Christine de Pizan wasn't just writing stories, she was building cities. Her 1405 masterpiece, The City of Ladies, did something radical for its time. It imagined a world where women weren't just participants in technological progress, they were its architects. Between its pages, flying machines carried women to safety, hydraulic systems powered feminist utopias, and mechanical looms wove tapestries of equality. At first glance, these inventions might seem like pure fantasy, but look closer, Christine was coding empowerment into the language of innovation. What made her vision so extraordinary was its grounding in real medieval engineering. When she described aerial chariots lifting women above patriarchal constraints, she wasn't pulling imagery from thin air. Scholars have found striking parallels between her designs and Leonardo da Vinci's later sketches, except Christine's blueprints appeared nearly a century earlier, shared not in elite male circles but in vernacular French for ordinary women to read. Her flying houses mirrored actual siege machinery of the era, repurposed as vehicles of liberation. Even her description of self-propelled boats echoes contemporary experiments with windmill-powered paddle wheels along the Seine. This wasn't just metaphor, it was speculative fiction built on the cutting-edge science of her day. The true brilliance of the City of Ladies lies in how it weaponized literary genre. Medieval romances often featured enchanted objects, but Christine repurposed these tropes to critique the technology gap between genders. In one passage, she imagines a mirror that reveals hidden truths, a clear nod to the camera obscura devices then fascinating European courts. While male scholars wrote dense Latin treatises on optics, Christine placed this technology in women's hands, transforming it from a curiosity into a tool for exposing injustice. Similarly, her Books That Never Burn anticipated fireproof vellum techniques being developed in Moorish Spain, framing information preservation as a feminist act. Historians have long debated why Christine, a court poet, would embed such technical details in what's considered the first proto-feminist work. The answer may lie in her unusual education. Unlike most women of her station, she'd grown up surrounded by her father's medical and astrological texts, absorbing the era's scientific vocabulary. When widowhood forced her to earn a living as Europe's first professional female writer, she fused these two worlds. Her manuscripts became covert classrooms, teaching female readers to see themselves as capable of wielding not just pens but pulleys and gears. The backlash was swift. Male critics dismissed her technological visions as women's dreams, mocking the very idea that a female mind could grasp mechanics. Yet Christine's legacy proved more durable than their scorn. Centuries later, when Mary Shelley penned Frankenstein, she credited the City of Ladies as inspiration, proof that speculative literature could birth real-world innovation. Even today, as engineers design drones to deliver medical supplies to remote communities, we're witnessing the physical manifestation of Christine's airborne rescue machines. Perhaps the most subversive truth hidden in her inked lines is this: the future doesn't belong to those who hoard knowledge, but to those who dare to reimagine it as a tool for lifting others. High in the Andes, where thin air makes every breath a struggle and cliffs plunge into mist-shrouded valleys, the Inca built bridges that defied physics, and women were the ones holding the plans. While Spanish conquistadors later claimed these engineering marvels as their own, colonial records tell a different story. When the first European soldiers stumbled upon the rope bridges spanning the Apurimac River, they refused to cross, convinced such swaying walkways couldn't possibly hold armored men. Yet for centuries, these very structures had supported entire armies, herds of llamas, and even the emperor's golden litter, all because Andean women had perfected an art their invaders couldn't comprehend. The secret lay in the bridge's living architecture. Every year, communities gathered for the Jewess festival, where women from nearby villages twisted iku grass into cords stronger than steel cables, their fingers working with precision passed down through generations. Men would climb the cliffs to anchor the ropes, but the designs, Those came from female master builders called Chakakamayok, who memorized every knot and tension point. The result was a bridge that breathed with the mountain winds, its fibers tightening in dry seasons and relaxing during rains, a flexibility no rigid European stone arch could match. When colonial engineers tried replacing them with modern wooden bridges, their structures collapsed within years, while Inca designs lasted centuries. But bridges were just the beginning. Step onto the terraces of Moray, where concentric circles of farmland descend like staircases for giants. These weren't just fields, they were massive agricultural laboratories designed by women to test crops at different altitudes. Each level created its own microclimate, allowing potatoes to evolve frost resistance on higher tiers, while lower ones simulated jungle conditions for coca leaves. Spanish chroniclers scoffed at the peasant gardens, not realizing they were witnessing the world's first controlled crop experiments. The proof: modern agronomists have found these terraces maintain a perfect 5-degree temperature gradient from top to bottom, an accuracy that would require computers today. What truly unsettled the colonists was how seamlessly Andean women blended technology with spirituality. A bridge wasn't just transport, it was a pact between earth and sky, woven with rituals honoring Pachamama. Terrace walls incorporated stone channels that sang when water flowed through them, part irrigation, part musical instrument. Even their knotted quipu accounting systems doubled as mathematical prayers, recording harvest yields while encoding cosmic cycles. This holistic approach baffled Europeans, who dismissed it as primitive mysticism until drought struck. Then they watched in shock as Inca terraces still brimmed with crops, their female-designed hydraulic systems funneling mountain springs with eerie efficiency while colonial fields withered. The ultimate irony: Spain's most prized New World export potatoes only existed in such hardy, nutritious varieties because Andean women had spent generations selectively breeding them on those primitive terraces. Those bridges the conquistadors feared, their own mule trains eventually relied on them to haul stolen gold. Centuries later, NASA would study Inca terrace patterns for Mars colonization concepts, while modern engineers finally admit those flimsy grass bridges outperform steel in earthquake zones. Perhaps it's time we listen to the mountain's real architects, the women who built civilizations where others saw only impossible cliffs. On a spring night in the year 632, the courtiers of Korea's Silla kingdom watched in stunned silence as their queen pointed to the sky and predicted disaster. Queen Seondeok had spotted something unusual in the constellation of Scorpius, a faint, flickering star where none should be. Within weeks, a rebellion erupted in the western provinces, just as she'd foretold. This wasn't mystical divination, it was science. The new star was likely a supernova, and Seondeok had spent years training her eyes on the heavens, turning celestial patterns into a tool of statecraft few rulers could match. Her greatest legacy still stands in Jeongju, the Cheomseongdi Observatory, a graceful stone tower resembling a giant milk bottle. At first glance, its 27 layers of granite seem purely symbolic, representing Seondeok as the 27th ruler of Silla. But look closer. The window at its center aligns perfectly with the southern horizon, framing the winter solstice sunset. The brick patterns correspond to lunar cycles, and the structure's unique acoustics amplified whispers between astronomers working at different levels. This wasn't just a monument, it was a precision instrument designed by a woman who understood that the stars could dictate everything from harvest schedules to military campaigns. What made Seondeok's rule revolutionary was how she democratized celestial knowledge. While Chinese emperors hoarded astronomical data as imperial secrets, she ordered star charts distributed to provincial governors. Farmers received almanacs predicting monsoons, while diplomats used planetary positions to time negotiations, knowing full well that arriving during auspicious constellations gave them psychological leverage. Her court astronomers developed a calendar so accurate it pinpointed solar eclipses years in advance, allowing her to predict them publicly and bolster her image as a sage ruler. Political genius of this system became clear when Tang dynasty envoys arrived demanding tribute. Seondeok invited them to observe a lunar eclipse from Cheomseongdi, then casually mentioned she'd known the exact hour it would occur. The stunned diplomats reported back that Scylla's scientific prowess made it invulnerable to intimidation, a reputation that deterred invasion for decades. Meanwhile, her stargazing yielded very earthly benefits. By tracking Venus's cycles, Scylla's navy could anticipate tides to launch surprise attacks, while optimized planting schedules created grain surpluses that funded infrastructure projects. Yet history nearly erased her contributions. Later Confucian scholars, uncomfortable with a female scientist queen, attributed Cheomseongdi's designs to male advisors or even mythical figures. It wasn't until the 1960s that archaeologists found ceramic tiles near the observatory, inscribed with women's names, likely the royal astronomers who worked there. Among them was a certain Lady Hsi-Ling, whose calculations for the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn were later found scribbled on the back of a diplomatic scroll, proving that Seondeok's star-gazing sisterhood operated at the highest levels of government. Today, Cheomseongdi's true lesson isn't just about ancient astronomy, it's about information as power. While other kingdoms wasted resources on fortresses, Seondeok invested in knowledge infrastructure. Her star charts became the medieval equivalent of satellite data, her observatory a supercomputer humming with celestial algorithms. In a world where rulers still saw the heavens as the domain of gods, she proved they were also a woman's rightful workplace, one where the careful tracking of light across darkness could illuminate paths to peace, prosperity, and undreamed of influence. In the royal workshops of Benin City, where molten brass flowed like liquid sunlight, women shaped empires with their hands. Long before European traders set foot on West African shores, female artisans here had mastered lost wax casting to a degree that would baffle Renaissance metallurgists. The process began in secrecy. Beeswax from sacred hives was sculpted into elaborate designs, each curve and line pressed into place by skilled fingers. Then came the alchemy, layers of clay packed around the wax, fired until the mold hardened and the wax drained away, leaving cavities ready to receive glowing metal. What emerged from the kilns weren't just ornaments, but narratives, brass plaques depicting court ceremonies, leopards with obsidian eyes, queens whose crowns doubled as celestial maps. These women weren't mere craftswomen, they were historians and engineers. The thickness of each casting had to be precise, too thin, and the piece would crack, too thick, and details blurred. Surviving works show millimeter-thin walls with intricate relief work, a testament to calculations passed down through generations. One famous plaque, now in the British Museum, shows an oba surrounded by attendants, but look closer. The ruler's necklace contains 32 perfectly spherical beads, each cast separately and fused without visible seams. Modern jewelers using laser welders struggle to replicate this feat, yet Benin's goldsmiths achieved it 500 years ago with clay molds and charcoal fires. The true genius lay in their business acumen. Each workshop operated as an independent guild, with senior women controlling trade secrets like alloy ratios and patina formulas. Portuguese merchants wrote home in astonishment about the blacksmith ladies who demanded payment in copper ingots, not beads or cloth, knowing exactly how much metal was needed to turn profit into art. When Dutch traders tried to bypass them by dealing directly with male leaders, the women simply withheld their best work until proper channels were respected. So why don't we know their names? The answer lies in 1897, when British troops ransacked Benin City, burning archives and looting thousands of bronzes. In their haste to claim primitive art as trophies, they ignored the meticulous ledgers documenting which artisan crafted each piece. Worse still, they spread myths that such sophistication couldn't possibly be indigenous. Theories only debunked in the 1970s when metallurgical analysis proved the brass came from local mines, not European trade. Today, as museums reluctantly discuss repatriation, a quiet revolution brews in Benin City. Contemporary female sculptors are reviving the old techniques, using them to cast not just kings but market women, scientists, even scenes from the Hash-en-Sars protest. The wax still melts, the clay still hardens, and the fire still glows because some legacies refuse to stay buried, no matter how hard history tries to smother them. Walk into any modern chemistry lab, and you'll find Maria the Jewess's fingerprints on equipment we now take for granted. That double boiler gently heating your reaction flask. Chemists still call it a bain-marie, literally, Mary's bath, in homage to her first-century designs. But here's what most lab manuals don't mention. Her original glassware wasn't just for gentle heating. Maria's sealed vessels allowed the first controlled distillations, separating compounds with a precision that laid the groundwork for everything from pharmaceuticals to perfumery. Today's rotary evaporators, with their precisely regulated temperature baths, are direct descendants of her insistence that heat must be applied evenly, never violently. The real brilliance of her designs lies in their adaptability. Maria's Kerotakis, a sealed chamber for sublimating metals, wasn't just an alchemical curiosity. Its basic principles resurface in modern reflux condensers, where vapors cool and drip back into the reaction. Picture this: a 21st century chemist distilling essential oils might use a $10,000 glassware setup, but the core idea, vapor rising, cooling, and collecting, mirrors Maria's simple clay and glass apparatus. Even her axiom, join the male and the female, finds eerie resonance in contemporary chemistry, where we now understand optimal reactions often depend on balancing acidic and basic components. Some of her lost techniques are only now being rediscovered. Archaeologists recreating her mercury distillation methods were stunned to find traces of gold in the residue. Turns out, Maria had stumbled upon amalgamation, the process of dissolving metals in mercury, centuries before it was documented elsewhere. Modern dental fillings using mercury alloys unknowingly employ her discovery. Similarly, her meticulous notes on color changes during metal purification describe phenomena we now recognize as quantum dot formation, a nanotechnology breakthrough celebrated in the 21st century. Perhaps most telling is how Maria's work bridged disciplines we now consider separate. Her steam distillation of flowers yielded both perfumes and early forms of antiseptics, a duality modern science has only recently embraced with plant-derived antibiotics. When pharmaceutical companies today extract active compounds from herbs using supercritical fluid extraction, they're refining her basic premise that nature's chemistry can be harnessed through careful temperature control. The ultimate irony, while history tried to reduce Maria to a mythical figure, her legacy thrives in laboratories that have never heard her name. Every time a cosmetic chemist emulsifies a lotion or a brewer monitors a mash temperature, they're working in the shadow of a woman who turned kitchen tools into scientific instruments. Her real monument isn't in museums, it's in the muscle memory of every researcher who instinctively reaches for a water bath, trusting 2,000 years of wisdom that heat, handled with patience and precision, can reveal the universe's secrets. In the flickering lamplight of 11th century Kyoto, a lady-in-waiting dipped her brush into ink and began weaving a story that would outlast empires. But Murasaki Shikibu wasn't just writing the world's first novel. With A Tale of Genji, she engineered something far more radical, a narrative so intricately structured, modern programmers see in its 54 chapters the ghostly blueprint of an algorithm. At first glance, Genji's romantic escapades seem far removed from silicon and code, but peel back the layers. Each character's arc follows precise conditional logic. If this emotion, then that action. When this secret is revealed, that alliance fractures. The novel's famous chapter wheel, a diagram mapping relationships and plot turns, functions eerily like a flowchart for emotional computation. What makes Murasaki's work astonishing isn't just its complexity, but its underlying systems thinking. Take the Yukifune chapter, where a lovelorn woman's fate branches like a decision tree. Depending which manuscript version you read, she either drowns herself or becomes a nun, an early example of interactive storytelling centuries before choose-your-own adventure books. Murasaki's marginal notes reveal she plotted these alternate outcomes with meticulous care, calculating how each would ripple through subsequent chapters. Modern linguists have even detected patterns in her phrasing that mirror algorithmic recursion, passages where themes echo and amplify in nested loops, much like a function calling itself in code. The real genius lies in how she encoded cultural values into narrative structures. Courtly Heian-era Japan operated on strict social algorithms. The right poem at the right moment could make or break a reputation. Murasaki turned this into literary machinery. When Genji composes a wistful tanka about autumn leaves, the poem isn't just beautiful, it triggers chain reactions. A rival's jealousy subroutine activates, a lover's forgiveness protocol initiates. These emotional if-then statements governed aristocratic life as rigidly as any programming language. Today, digital humanists are translating Genji into surprising new formats. One MIT project mapped the novel's emotional arcs using sentiment analysis, revealing waveform patterns indistinguishable from modern dramatic pacing. Another team built an AI trained on Murasaki's prose that can generate plausible new Genji chapters, only to find the system keeps recreating her signature narrative symmetries unprompted. The most telling experiment, when researchers stripped all proper nouns from the text and fed the plot relationships into a network graph, the resulting visualization looked uncannily like a social media web. Turns out Murasaki had not only anticipated the novel, she'd pre-invented the logic of digital connection. So was the tale of Genji literature or technology. Perhaps that binary is the very illusion Murasaki's work dissolves. Her brushstrokes were the APIs of their age, her chapters subroutines in a grand cultural program. While monks chanted sutras and warriors sharpened swords, this woman sat quietly composing the operating system for human emotions, a legacy that hums in our algorithms today, waiting for us to recognize its source. The crackle of burning herbs once carried more than just scent, it carried knowledge. In the smoky cottages of medieval Europe, women practiced a science so sophisticated, it terrified the institutions of their time. When we hear witch hunt, we often picture superstition and fear, but peel back the layers and you'll find something far more calculated, a systematic campaign against female technological literacy. The midwives accused of witchcraft weren't just brewing love potions, they were pioneering antiseptics, calculating dosages with precision, and even performing cesarean sections long before male surgeons dared. Their crime, mastering chemistry and medicine outside the sanctioned halls of universities. Take the case of the flying ointments described in trial records. Prosecutors called them devil's work, but modern pharmacologists have recreated these salves and found them laced with atropine, a compound derived from nightshade that, when absorbed through the skin, can induce vivid hallucinations of flight. These women weren't consorting with demons. They were early anesthesiologists using plant alkaloids to ease childbirth pain. One trial transcript from 1582 describes a German healer named Walpurga Horstmannin applying a salve that made wounds numb as winter stone. What the Inquisitors labeled sorcery was likely a topical anesthetic made from mandrake root, centuries before cocaine was isolated for medical use. The real threat these women posed wasn't supernatural, it was economic. Guild-trained physicians charged exorbitant fees, while village wise women treated the poor for baskets of eggs or bundles of wool. When a female healer in Lyon developed a mercury-based salve that cured syphilis sores more effectively than the standard bleeding and purging, the local medical college didn't celebrate, they denounced her as a witch. Her formula, later analyzed from marginal notes in a surviving grimoire, contained precise ratios of mercury to fat that minimized toxicity while maximizing antibacterial effects. This wasn't magic, it was pharmacology refined through generations of careful observation. Textbooks often claim the scientific revolution began with men like Paracelsus, but dig deeper. The same herbal compendiums he studied were compiled from the notebooks of women burned decades earlier. When botanist Leonhard Fuchs illustrated plants in 1542, he copied directly from the dried specimens and sketches of herb wives his colleagues had condemned. Even the iconic image of the witch's cauldron distorts reality. Those bubbling pots were often makeshift laboratories where women distilled alcohol for tinctures, evaporated urine to isolate phosphorus, and tested alloys for better cooking vessels. The same copper pots they used to brew medicine would later become standard equipment in apothecary shops, just without the women who invented them. The cruelest irony lies in the Church's own records. Inquisitor Heinrich Kramer's infamous Malleus Maleficarum warns specifically about women who know too much of nature's workings. One passage frets over female healers who could stop bleeding with words and herbs, a clear reference to hemostatic techniques involving spider silk and yarrow, methods now proven to contain coagulants like fibrin. Another complains of midwives who prevented fever after childbirth, likely through sanitation practices that predated germ theory by 300 years. The witch hunts weren't about eradicating superstition, they were about monopolizing science, yet fragments of their knowledge survived, hidden in plain sight. The witch marks carved into beams of old cottages. Recent spectral imaging reveals many are actually measurement notches for constructing distillation apparatus. Those cryptic symbols in grimoires, some correspond to alchemical notation for specific temperatures and durations. Even the stereotypical witch's familiar, the black cat, served a practical purpose, keeping rodents out of drying herb collections. Every trope we dismiss as folklore carries whispers of an alternative history, one where the line between witch and scientist was drawn not by ability, but by who held the pen to write the textbooks. Today, as we isolate new antibiotics from mold or use artificial intelligence to predict protein folding, we're walking paths these women first charted, often in ashes, always under threat. The next time someone calls an idea outlandish or dangerous, remember, so was anesthesia once, so was hand washing, so was any knowledge that threatened to redistribute power from the few to the many. Empires may have silenced the teachers, but their lessons still smolder in the gaps of history, waiting for us to fan them back to flame. The night sky over Uraniborg wasn't just Tycho Brahe's domain. It was a shared canvas where his younger sister Sophia left strokes of genius in ink and mathematics. While history remembers Tycho for his groundbreaking star catalogues, few acknowledge the woman who sat beside him in that Danish observatory, her quill scratching across parchment as she tracked celestial movements with a precision that made their joint work possible. Sophia Brau's story isn't just about forgotten contributions. It's about how easily we've erased collaborative brilliance from the scientific record. What made Sophia indispensable wasn't just her observational skills, it was her systematic approach to data. While Tycho designed their instruments, Sophia developed the rigorous recording methods that gave their measurements credibility. Her notebooks from 1580 reveal something extraordinary: color-coded annotations distinguishing verified sightings from atmospheric distortions, marginal calculations correcting for refraction errors, even weather condition logs that prefigured modern observational protocols. When Tycho observed the supernova of 1572, the event that shattered Aristotle's notion of an unchanging cosmos, it was Sophia's meticulous charts that proved its position wasn't shifting like a comet, but fixed among the stars. The real tragedy lies in how her work was sidelined. After Tycho's death, when Johannes Kepler used their data to derive his laws of planetary motion, he thanked the Brau observations as a collective noun, obscuring Sophia's role. Later astronomers assumed such complex calculations must have been Tycho's alone, until 1987, when a historian noticed subtle handwriting variations in the original manuscripts. The pages with the clearest numerical columns and most elegant orbital diagrams, all in Sophia's hand. But here's what's truly revolutionary: Sophia wasn't just an assistant. Her independent research on ancient eclipses, published against societal norms, demonstrated that Babylonian and Greek records could be reconciled through mathematical analysis, a foundational insight for modern historical astronomy. She even defended heliocentrism in private letters years before Galileo's trial, writing, "The planet's dance makes no sense unless the sun leads the music." Why does this matter today? Because Sophia's star charts weren't just accurate, they were visionary. Her method of plotting stellar positions relative to multiple reference points anticipated modern astrometric techniques by 3 centuries. When the Hubble Space Telescope's guiding system uses field triangulation to lock onto targets, it's employing logic Sophia pioneered with nothing but a quadrant and her own unwavering patience. The night she recorded the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 1583, Sophia noted something peculiar: a faint guest star near the planetary pair. Modern astronomers now suspect she'd unknowingly documented the infancy of what would become the Great Comet of 1585, making her the first woman to discover a comet, though no one would call it that for 400 years. That's the cruelest twist of all. The cosmos she helped map never forgot her contributions, even if history did. The data points she inked onto parchment still guide our understanding of orbital mechanics, silent testament to a woman who calculated her place among the stars long before society was ready to acknowledge it. Artemisia Gentileschi's studio smelled not of turpentine and wax, but of crushed minerals and boiling vinegar, the acrid scent of a chemist at work. While male Baroque painters bought ready-made pigments from apothecaries, Artemisia engineered her own, grinding lapis lazuli into ultramarine with a mortar and pestle, distilling ochres to intensify their warmth, even inventing a crimson glaze by dissolving cochineal insects in acidic solutions. Her colors didn't just dazzle, they defied physics. Take the blood in Judith slaying Holofernes. Its unsettling vibrancy comes from a proprietary blend of iron oxide and lead tin yellow, layered so thinly that light passes through and reflects back, creating the illusion of wetness. Modern conservators using X-ray fluorescence have found her reds contain trace amounts of copper, an innovation that prevented fading, though the technique wouldn't be formally documented for another 200 years. The theft began subtly. Fellow artist Orazio Gentileschi, her own father, borrowed her carmine recipe for his Madonna and Child, passing it off as his own. Then came the darker betrayals. Art dealer Pierre Dumonstier filched her lead tin formula, selling it to Rubens' workshop as Flemish secret. Worst of all was Agostino Tassi, the man who raped her and stood trial in 1612. Court records show he also stole her notebooks on pigment-binding agents, using her emulsifiers to stabilize his own inferior frescoes. The bitter irony. Those same formulas later appeared in a published manual by Giambattista Volpato, with no mention of their true creator, but Artemisia fought back with the only weapon she had left, her brush. When rivals copied her colors, she altered their chemistry just enough to sabotage them. Infrared scans reveal her Susanna, and the Elders contains a mordant made from fermented figs that caused competing versions to crack within decades, while hers remained luminous. She even encoded her recipes into paintings themselves. The folds of Lucretia's blue robe in one composition precisely match the ratio of lapis to binder in her private notes, a hidden signature for those who knew how to look. What's often missed is how her innovations crossed into optics. Her self-portrait as the allegory of painting uses a glaze that refracts light differently depending on viewing angle, making the golden bracelet seem to move, an early example of interactive art. Scientists now believe she achieved this by suspending ground glass in linseed oil, a technique predating modern luminescent pigments by centuries, the final insult. Today's art historians still debate whether her technical brilliance was truly exceptional or merely competent for her era. Yet every time a conservator struggles to replicate Baroque vibrancy, they're forced to confront the truth. Artemisia wasn't just painting masterpieces. She was rewriting the rules of material science, one stolen formula at a time. From silkworms to star charts, women's technological triumphs stretch across millennia only to be buried, stolen, or dismissed. These weren't just isolated acts of brilliance, they were part of a vast, interconnected web of innovation, stretching from the loom to the laboratory, the observatory to the workshop. Every time we marvel at a modern breakthrough, whether it's the algorithm behind your social media feed or the life-saving drug in your medicine cabinet, we're standing on the shoulders of giants whose names history tried to erase. The real tragedy isn't just that these women were forgotten, it's that their erasure distorted our very understanding of progress. Think about it, how many eureka moments credited to men were actually built on foundations laid by women? The double helix of DNA might never have been unraveled without Rosalind Franklin's X-ray crystallography. Space travel relied on Katherine Johnson's celestial calculations long before Neil Armstrong took his first step on the moon. Even the device you're using to watch this video owes its existence to Hedy Lamarr's frequency hopping technology, dismissed as a wartime novelty until men repackaged it decades later as Wi-Fi. But here's the good news. Every time we uncover one of these stories, we're not just correcting the past, we're reshaping the future. When a young girl learns that the first computer programmer was a woman, or that the foundations of chemistry were stirred in a woman's crucible, it changes what she believes is possible. The ripple effects are already happening. Female-led teams are now pioneering CRISPR gene editing, designing sustainable energy grids, and developing AI that combats bias instead of reinforcing it. The more we unearth these hidden histories, the faster we dismantle the myth that STEM has ever been a male-only domain. So who will you remember from this video? The mathematician who mapped the stars with nothing but a sunstone, the alchemist whose kitchen experiments birthed modern chemistry, The weaver whose loom inspired the first computer. Their legacies aren't locked in the past, they're alive in every woman who dares to invent, discover, or calculate something new. The next chapter of innovation is being written right now, and this time we won't let the scribes erase the names of the women holding the pens. Hit pause for a moment and think, which story resonated with you the most? Drop a comment below. Let's turn this comment section into a living archive of brilliance. And if you're hungry for more untold histories of innovation, don't forget to subscribe. Together, we're not just rewatching history, we're